Hey everybody, how you doing? Welcome to Colored Commentary, colorful conversations by colorful people about Christianity, culture, and race. I'm your host, Markus Lloyd, here in the studio, and with me, as always, is the birthday boy.
Oh, that's what we're doing today. Okay.
It is Antwuan's birthday, and we are excited. We have cake.
I was born today.
Candles.
Or not today,
yeah, I mean,
actually. Like,
not
record
day. The record day.
On a day like
it
today.
is. So we got everybody in the studio. We brought in. We got Chino that came out here. We got Pepper in the house.
It was all for me?
All for you. We weren't going to show up today. It was just going to be you.
That's what we're doing
the show. But because it's your birthday.
I did ask before I scheduled today's podcast. I was like, hey, I know it's your birthday, but are you okay with
I love she's covering herself right now. This is it sounds like you're like people in the audience are going, I can't believe he's doing this.
Why is he working on his
I can't believe they made him do this stuff.
I asked.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. It was good. Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Appreciate it. It's
do you have
good
any,
to be alive.
Do you have any fun birthday traditions? Hey, you can't give me this look because you have traditions in other ways. Why not the question? I know you don't have any, but I just wanted to let people know.
Well, I'm not. I thought we did this on a show.
Did we?
Okay, so
your birthday.
Yeah, on my birthday, I like to celebrate being alive like the rest of the people. No, I will listen. I will listen. What you're trying to get? I will listen to Christmas music tomorrow. Or at least I will permit myself to listen to Christmas music tomorrow because that is just what I will do. So that's
I wasn't fishing for that one.
You were too.
I was not because
yes,
you were. I don't see that as a birthday tradition.
As a birthday
I see it as a Christmas tradition. Because there's a there's a line between
things can be more than one thing, Marcus.
I understand that, but I was not thinking. I was very binary in my thinking.
Yeah, that's what I do. So I don't know. I don't know if that's actually going to happen. I just have permission to myself in my own world of rules within myself.
So just
I can start tomorrow.
Since this is a birthday tradition, what do you have a particular song that you're thinking about it maybe today? Because I know it's not set. Like every year, it's not like my wife was like, I'm watching Home Alone. That's one thing, right? But do you have a song that you're thinking about?
It's probably not a song, but I have a playlist that I might do. But what I typically do is it's right about now that you can start looking for what new Christmas music is going to be released.
Just while people are talking, this is October 11th.
That's correct.
Okay, just want to set the stage for whenever this comes out.
But right about now, you start looking and you're like, oh, so-and-so is going to release a Christmas album, and sometimes it's already released and, or what have you.
Because they know that you're going to be starting.
It's just for me.
It's just
so I probably will just see okay, so what's new that's coming out that I might be interested in, and then I'll just I like to hit shuffle on playlists. Sure. So I don't have to get into a rhythm. I don't pick a singular song, but the song that's in my head right now,
fair enough,
is Boyz II Men, Let It Snow. No, we're not doing it. See, I will not sing with you, cuz.
No,
but let it.
I was just getting it started.
No, it's only 8. We only have what is it? 8 notes, 8 seconds before we have to start.
That's true. I can't.
Yeah.
We gotta pay.
See, So we see.
So there you go.
It's
a copy.
See, it was the marketer in me that was protecting her.
Well, hey, happy birthday!
Thank you.
We are glad you are alive.
Hey, audience,
are you just gonna cut me off?
I am
trying to give you a blessing.
Since we're in birthday season. What I'm saying
Whose birthday season?
I mean, whatever.
It's
a birthday.
It's not our birthday season.
It's the birthday season.
Since it's a birthday today.
Okay, that's fine.
Oh, okay.
If you haven't subscribed to the channel, I need help, and let's see if we can get these subscriptions up. It'd be a nice little.
And just start by donating $10 a month.
Well, you could do that too. You know what? I was inspired by the fact that Antwuan was born. That was why I gave my $10 a month.
I am going to up my donation by $10.
There you go.
For that.
Just for that reason. Yeah. Or, you could subscribe to the channel. I'm not trying to beg for it. I'm just saying it'd be a nice little gift.
It would be a nice gift. I think that's nice.
1,000 subscribers.
Right.
Today.
You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go to wearethreaded.org/shop, and I'm going to get you a shirt.
You'll hook me up with a shirt,
maybe a hoodie, because we're getting into Christmas.
Or
I want to get
card.
you. I'm gonna get you a red and white color commentary hoodie that you can wear while you listen to your Christmas music. No, don't do it. Maybe a green one.
I'm just I can't do it. I'm not gonna do it.
All right. Well, all I know is that every time you tell me that you start your Christmas after your birthday.
No, it's just Christmas music.
I know Christmas music. Well, again, to me, it means you're starting Christmas.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Right? Mm-hmm. Every time you do that, it makes me go, say what?
Oh,
yeah. So
it is.
that's just transitioning, yes, because we're in the space. So welcome back to
that was our say what comes. And we'll go ahead and go into our guest. No,
I might have to. Oh my gosh. Okay, so let's get a little say what that's in the genre, if you will, of the show. We're not pushing your birthday out. We're just moving on. That's all.
Just move it.
All right, good, fantastic. All right, Pepper,
You ready?
Give us something for the say what.
Okay. Aren't we all one race?
That's it.
That's it.
That's to say what?
Yes.
Aren't we all just
someone has been in conversation about race and they've heard all the reasons why they should engage, and their response is, but aren't we all just one race?
Yes. I have heard that. I feel like there's lots of ways that kind of then kind of continues in it. But
there's definitely an iceberg under that.
Yeah, that's the way. Yeah.
Under that thing.
And you're not sure which iceberg you're about to deal with. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If it's just in that, I find myself almost immediately not less interested in what's underneath the surface in terms of like where the full conversation will go, but really what is underneath the surface, right? Like, is this, when I've heard it, sometimes it feels like when I'm there that the person is trying to avoid the conversation, right? Like we're talking about race and like, but aren't we just one race, right? And so it feels like
it sounds like the real question is, why do we need to talk about this?
Yeah, exactly, right? So
they're looking for a way out. It could sound like they're just this voice is just looking to not engage.
Yeah, which again I think sparks even more questions, like what's happening in this moment in this time that they feel uncomfortable, or they feel triggered, they don't feel safe in this conversation. And again, a lot. I'm not going to say. Here's what I'm going to say. Yes, in that version of it, a lot of times it's white folks, or it's those who are non-white who aren't from here, who are maybe a different culture, coming from, or different ethnicity that's not born in America. And so they kind of say, like, why are we even talking about
this?
Why is
this a big deal?
Yeah, it should be a big deal. So I mean, that's part of what I think
about. Sometimes you hear that from a more Christian voice. They're coming from the place of, we're one in Christ, therefore there's no race in the kingdom of God, is what they're thinking, and therefore this conversation is a secular conversation, not a kingdom conversation. We don't need to have it. And so it could potentially be that this person is believing that they're protecting the energy of Christians from engaging in spaces that they don't believe is connected to the kingdom of God. It might, cite some verses that might imply that, or whatever. They've gotten some ideas from First Peter that says, we're all priests in one nation and one race, is what some verses would say in that First Peter passage that says, I can't remember the quote right now.
Sorry, but it's a one race piece.
Yeah.
Which goes along with the Galatians kind of, there is no Jew or Greek, right. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So it's this connection.
Yeah, so there's no distinctions, and I would just say that's just I think what, we don't need to get into really how to overcome it. I would just say that those verses are verses that represent, at least the Galatians verse, in my opinion. I think the way I understand that passage is, Paul is like, the value that you have is not associated to the social distinctions of secular world. And so he's not saying that those distinctions are absent.
Right.
Because we know that there is poor, and we know that there is male and female, and we know that there is slave and free. In fact, he tells them later in Ephesians to, when as a slave and as a master, how to behave. So he knows that these secular distinctions are there. What he's communicating is that value is not attached to those social distinctions. So for someone who may come with this conversation to say, hey, I don't think we need to talk about that because the Bible says we're all one race. I'm like, no, what he's saying is our value is settled in the kingdom of God as a united, flat value spectrum at the seat of the cross, not a hierarchical value spectrum that is a part of what a secular world would represent. And he's trying to get us to think in that more flat horizontal way instead of the vertical or hierarchical way that we are inclined to think about in our civilized jungle.
Yes. Well, and I think that goes to the term too, because a lot of folks just kind of go, and you were making reference to this, they want to see how it fits in theologically.
Yeah.
Right. They're like, it feels like a secular thing. We need to be, if we're the church, we need to be concentrating on the things that are theological. Right. Yeah. And so what I would say, based on even what you're talking about, like even the term race, like the way I even describe race, it's a social corruption of a sovereign construction, right? So the components, I've said this before, but I'll say it quickly. The components that make up our definition of race, as far as how we differentiate people, is about skin color, physical features, hair texture, right? These phenotypical things. And in the midst of that, those things have always existed, right? Now, in the 1400s, whatever, we put a name on it and said that's race. But part of the doing that and putting the name race on it is so that we could create this hierarchical value system. But I would articulate that wasn't just, that didn't start in the 1400s. That's been happening in antiquity way before we got to this very, measured way of doing it. And so people like that doesn't feel theological because we're working off of an American definition of race, as opposed to a sovereign construction of physical and racial, or physical and color differences, right? Those things are created by God. They're intentionally created by God. And they have been the source of division in our society. They've been the source of oppression. They've been the source of division in the church, as people who are repairers of the breach, those who are supposed to bring people together across divides and across barriers. Theologically, and even missiologically, our role is to try to mend the gaps, to mend those divides. Yeah. And so the engagement in, particularly in America, the racial conversation is a theological space because it's engaging the places where divide has been created. Right. And what we can do in that space is we can actually reclaim the beauty of difference in these physical differences, and move the corruption out. And now redeem what God has already created, as opposed to running from it and pretend we don't see those things. Right. So again, there's lots of convo that I think people can go in. But I think those are some of the places that when I hear that, Pepper, I think that's what I understand it. Right. So
so I guess you could just like smile at that person and say, "Yeah, we're gonna keep talking about it."
So you mean like let's just keep talking about it? Or?
No, I think. I think it's an invitation. Yeah, I think it's an invitation to discover. Yeah, like you were saying at the beginning, like, but what is, let's not misassign motives. Sure. You ask the question like, what is going to be tell me why you think that, right? Where's that coming from? Some people say we're all the human race. True. And there's other ways, but do you think historically that there's ways to engage it. History tells us that race has mattered at the very minimum, from a sociological point of view, and we at least have to deal with that reality.
Yeah, it's a real and not real thing. All at the same time.
Even if that was a mistake, which we would agree that it is,
right? The way we articulate it,
we have to deal with the ramifications of that.
Which leaves that question of what's at stake if you do take race out of the deal, where a lot of the consequences and benefits that came through the way we used race before gets locked in and cemented in, because then if you're not allowed to use the term race, then later when you start to continually see these inequities still in these racial categories, you can't go to...
You have a category to identify.
Hey, I don't know what you're talking about. We don't talk about race. That's not us. So, Antwuan, today we're continuing the conversation. This is kind of one of those episodes where I think we're tagging on to our Christianity in the Public Square, right? And so today what we're going to talk about is, I think, something that doesn't get a lot of conversation. We haven't had a conversation about this, at least on the show, right? And so
at least not publicly.
It's not public. So we're like, let's bring this to the show, see what can happen. And so we're going to talk about how the political conversation is affecting the next generation of Christianity.
There is more to talk about there than we realize, I think.
Absolutely. And so today, what I wanted to do, so we can talk about this and feel pretty confident about what we're doing, we brought in a guest. She is a writer, an author, and a doctoral student at Duke Divinity School, where they study political theology and ethics, Pepper. I know this is exciting for you. She holds a THM in systematic theology from Dallas Theological Seminary, a seminary right here in our own town. And she's the author of a couple of books. One book is called The Theology of Politics, Spiritual Formation for the Sake of Our Neighbor. And then her most recent book that I'm seeing here, The Ballot and the Bible. I like that great start. Subcategory of that, The Ballot and the Bible, How Scripture Has Been Used and Abused in American Politics, and where we go from here, right? She's written a lot of other things, been in some publications, Christianity Today, the New York Times, and contributed a chapter on political theology and conspiracy theories, which I think is going to be fun, in the recent Erdman's publication, QAnon, Chaos, and the Cross. I love it. I'm feeling that. So please welcome to Colored Commentary, Kaitlyn Schiess. How you doing, Kaitlyn? Good to see you. Welcome.
Good. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I'm glad you're here.
We forgot the main thing.
Oh,
like she's had her own show called On the Holy Post.
The Holy Post.
Which
it's true. It's true.
Phil and I don't know how does he want to be known as the VeggieTales guy?
I don't know if he still wants to hold on to that.
Does he like that, or he might lean into it.
He can't escape it.
He really
just
can't.
Last week on our show, I made a joke about a VeggieTales thing I had just watched at my church, so he can't escape it. It is kind of. I tell people all the time to prove to them that the podcast I do is not something I do in my mom's basement. I say I do it with the guy who made VeggieTales.
There you go. That's what's up.
I don't know if there was a subconscious piece that I was separating from VeggieTales and not mentioning Holy Post and Phil Vischer. Like I feel like I have to do the impressions that I did for my children when they were growing up, when they wanted me to do all the stuff as we were going on. And they were always very afraid of. There was a couple of episodes they were afraid of in the VeggieTales space.
Really?
Oh yeah. The Island of Perpetual Tickling.
Yo.
It's an Esther story. Deuce could not sleep. He could not sleep.
That does sound like a horror story. I don't know.
I mean, you think about it, I guess so. Yeah, I know. I don't know. I like to laugh, so it's all good. I was in, but he was
tickled. Though,
even today at 16, I'm like, hey, what do you think? You want to watch it? He's like, I think I'm gonna be all right, Dad. I'm gonna do something else. I don't know if it's gonna work. So maybe he knows.
He still has that Brenda humor. He brings it to the show. We can just listen to it. Fun fact though, I've only watched half of a VeggieTales show.
Are you allowed to do interviews on podcasts where the other person does not watch?
I've never watched. Like it was past my time.
I don't think I've ever met someone.
This is the continuation of our relationship.
You just aged yourself.
Just so many things that I just these new things.
All I know is that there's a choir at some point.
There's a what?
In the Noah story or the flood story, there's like a choir. Like isn't there like some singing choir thing or something somewhere? I know about that.
Okay.
Or maybe I don't know about that based on this response.
I just think
I don't know anything about that.
There's probably several episodes with a choir. So the fact that Noah with the choir as they drown in the water, they sing
that one time. Yeah. It was the only one. I don't know. Maybe.
Speaking of the next generation,
so today we will go home and watch VeggieTales.
That's the list.
Oh man! Well, hey, Kaitlyn, we're glad you're here.
Actually, myself,
we love, and I know lots of people have been supported and helped through the books that you're writing, the articles, and Holy Post as well. So thank you for being on the show. And just as we even get started, like just tell the audience a little bit, like where are you located right now? Like where is your home right now?
Yeah, I'm literally physically located right now in Chicago for a Holy Post event, but I live in North Carolina, in Durham, North Carolina, working on my doctorate at Duke. But I grew up a military kid, so I kind of grew up all over the country. And don't really feel like there's one single place that I call home, but I did. A lot of my formative years were in evangelical theological institutions. I went to Liberty University for my undergrad, and then you mentioned I went to Dallas Seminary. So that has been my world for a very long time. It has shaped me in some positive and some negative ways. And there was a point when I was, a college student figuring out life where I realized these are really important questions that are shaping my generation. I mean, I was in college during the 2016 election at a place like Liberty University. So that was an up close and really intimate experience of this relationship between faith and politics. And it shaped my interests for kind of the rest of my life.
Wow. I'm just thinking about like the progression, the theological progression from Liberty
I know. To DTS to Duke now. Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
What's next?
I'm afraid to talk about what might be next.
Yeah.
After we
Well, I gotta say is people will often make assumptions one way or the other. Like people at Duke will assume like, oh, you've gotten progressively better. Like I know. That's what I was like. Better institutions. And then other people sort of assume like, oh, your foundation was in these conservative institutions, so you must still be very conservative. When in reality, what I have found to be true, I'm really thankful I've gotten to be in such different educational institutions, because I feel like when I was in Dallas and when I was in undergrad, I learned a lot of the failures of conservative evangelicalism. And some of my peers who learned those things never really left those places. And so I think some of us kind of kept this idea that like the grass is greener on the other side. There's failures in all of these places, but other Christians or non-Christians have got it all figured out. There's no problems there. And then going to a much less evangelical, much more progressive theological institution, what that taught me was like, oh, there are some failures in this institution too. Like there are some ditches on the other side of the road. And it's really helped kind of push me in different directions and clarify what actually are the foundational Christian beliefs that I think the church has held on to for our history that are important, and what are the things that are various failures in different directions, that like there are excesses, there are overemphases that need to be corrected, and gifts. There are gifts that all of these various traditions give as well. Yeah. But I don't think I would have had quite that perspective if I had been in always one or the other kind of place.
That's cool.
What does it look like then? I mean, I think as the audience hears, you're getting your doctoral, but you're studying. Is it political theology and ethics? That's right. Right. What is that? What does that mean? I don't know, you know what I mean? Like, I don't just help us understand that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So political theology in the sense that I'm using it for my degree and that people who study it today mean it. There was a different version that was like, kind of early 20th century. It was a technical term. Today, when people say political theology, they just mean theological reflection on how communities live together, because that's what politics is. Right. So I took a bunch of political theory classes. A lot of Western political theory was shaped by Christian ideas. And then I also took a lot of theology classes and thought about, what does scripture say? What does Christian tradition say? Not just narrowly about like what form of government should we have or what policies should we have, though that's an important question I think theology speaks to, but just more broadly, like what does it mean for a community to live well together? Especially, I think one of the central Christian questions, like distinct from our Jewish ancestors in the faith, is this question of how do we live well in communities when we inevitably know we are not existing as our own nation and we will live amongst people who are very different from us and believe very different things. That's kind of like that's the beginning question that Christians are asking even in the New Testament, like as a new people, like who are we and how do we relate to outsiders? And for political theology, that's also kind of a central question. Like, what does it mean to live under the rule of earthly governments, but also ultimately under the rule of Christ? And what does it mean to participate in different kinds of political systems?
Yeah. So So I think about books of the Bible, maybe that may be part of that. Like, what are some of the books of the Bible that are like, to me, I'm thinking First Peter is one, but what are some of the others?
Leviticus.
I mean, I think all of them.
Yeah.
Well,
I really do think that all of them.
Give us the verse. I need a single verse that just goes in.
Yeah. I'm thinking but the people are in that context in some way. And that's speaking to that more directly than I won't say indirectly, but
which ones do you lean on maybe for most of your work?
Well, I have kind of a workshop that I do at churches that's just here's like an overview of political theology. And the passages that I go to kind of frame that, I start in Genesis, both the very beginning of Genesis to say like this is a picture of creation and a commission given to Adam and Eve to rule and reign over creation. Those are political words, especially the Hebrew words that we're translating into English. And then the rest of Genesis is a story of them failing to fulfill that commission, but also of God choosing a people and saying, actually, that commission is specifically for you too. Like the first conversation God has with Abraham is, I will bless you and you will be a blessing to the nations. That's right. This outward orientation of the people of God. So I start in Genesis, then I skip all of the hard stuff and go to Revelation and say, okay, if here at the end of the story, there's also a picture of human community, right? Chapter 21, the end story is not a garden. It's not a church. It's a city. It's a human community. Right. And oftentimes I'm speaking to churches where there are people who work in local government, and I'll say, anyone who works for a city knows cities do not just exist. Even without sin, you have questions about where roads go and where businesses are and how we live together well. And so the very beginning of the story and the very end of the story, I think, is a political story. And then in between, I do go to some places in the Old Testament law and prophets to say, here are examples of why God cares about the nitty gritty details of how human communities work together. Christians can kind of turn our noses up at some of the Old Testament laws that don't apply to us. But what we learn there is like God actually really, I mean, to the point of like in this very specific legal scenario, God says something that matters. God cares about human communities, and the prophets care about the relationship between our worship and justice and how we treat people in the communities that are trying to worship God. And then in the New Testament, I go both to a couple places in the Gospels to talk about how Jesus interacts with political power, but also, really importantly, how Jesus describes some perennial human temptations when it comes to politics. One of my favorite places is Luke 4, the beginning of his public ministry in Luke, where he's not only quoting from Isaiah and this very material gospel, right? Like freedom to the captive, sight to the blind, the year of the Lord's favor, but also the little interaction he has after that with the people listening is so fascinating because they love him when they think that this liberation is for them.
It's for them.
And then when they are reminded it's for other people, it's like we want to throw you off a cliff. So there's some like perennial political temptations that are just described in these stories. And I'll go to places like 1 Peter and Romans 13 to say there are some specific verses that talk about this new community figuring out what does it mean for us to live as a people that aren't trying to become a nation again, that we are supposed to be dispersed throughout the world.
Wait a second. Now you're getting off topic here. Like, they're not supposed to be creating a nation. Is that true? Like, please continue on to your blasphemy.
The Apostle Paul would say yes. And those are great direct teachings on government. But those are literally some of the last things I say, because I want to first say, like, what is the large scriptural story that all of this makes sense in? Because if you start with, a lot of people, that's the first thing they'll ask me. Romans 13, what's up with that? Obey governing authorities. Does that apply to mask mandates? Does that apply to protests? Does that... And what I'll often say is like, well, first, if we have this whole story that says the people of God are oriented towards the flourishing of God's creation, that changes how we're viewing what Paul's doing in Romans 13, because suddenly it's not just obey the government because they're always right, which he, as an imprisoned man, could not possibly have believed was true. But instead, it's actually a reiteration, I think, of what it says in Jeremiah 29 to an exiled people, seek the peace and prosperity of the city into which I have brought you. Paul is also saying, hey, your temptation would be to hunker down, like either to keep yourself safe from authorities that want to persecute you, or just to keep yourself pure from sinful influences around you. And the word to this new people figuring out who they are in Romans 13 is actually the good of the people that are around you is bound up in your good. I think that's what he means when he says, do good and you will be rewarded. He's drawing on this system of benefaction at the time that said, you do give big public works on behalf of the community. And then the last verses that are really kind of, a lot of scholars think that last verse 7 that says, like, give everyone what they are owed, honor, respect.
That's just for pastors, though. That's just for pastors. Just to give honor to what's honored is just pastors.
Right, just to give it to the pastor. Well, a lot of scholars think it's so short and pithy at the end because it's supposed to be memorized. And so there's like instruction here for Paul saying, like, hey, I've given you all this big cosmic theological reason to care about government. Government is actually not just based on its own authority. It's based on God's authority. It's accountable to God. But when you're out living your life and you're encountering actual government authority, this isn't an abstract question. Remember these things. You owe something to your community. If it conflicts with what God asks you to do, we've got other verses, Acts 5:29, we must obey God rather than human beings. But I think his main teaching there is like, your temptation might be to think you don't have obligations to those outside the people of faith. And actually you do.
Wow. Yeah.
I think I'm really fascinated by it. And I think it's interesting. Anytime you're creating this, workshop, if you will, this apologetic, your thinking context, and you are articulating the idea of where you put these verses in there. Right. And so there's a sense that you start at the garden, right? So you give them a sense of the foundation. Most people don't disagree. It's like, this is when God said this is good, right? This is the spot. We're always we're kind of working back, if you will, to this place. And then you jump forward to Revelation, and you've got kind of this vision of what the future looks like, so that you can go, okay, here's where we're going. But I'm really fascinated, because I was thinking when you were like, people start with this Romans 13, to me, I'm curious about the racial makeup of that audience. You know what I mean? Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, because I don't know
the Roman audience.
No, I'm talking about in the context of her audience that she's talking to.
Who she's talking to.
I don't know if you go to black churches that they're thinking about Romans 13 the same way a suburban white church is. And I know this because I worked at a suburban white church and preached Romans 13 as if I was at a black church. And how'd
that go for you?
It didn't go well. It didn't go well. Read the room, Marcus, is what I told myself later.
You got fond memories.
Yeah, it's fine. I was trying to give them a different perspective, just another way to think about it. They didn't want to think about it that way. Yeah, so it's all right. But I love this. So all that to say is there's people who are engaging this conversation. They have very specific places they're trying to get to. And as the church kind of goes at this, and I even, again, using the example of even saying, hey, this is how the black church would come at Romans 13. Here's how the white church come at Romans 13. As we have gone at this, what's some of the, to go back to what we're talking about, like what's some of the fallout of the ways that we approach this political conversation and the theology of politics? What's some of the usual sort of fallout that you see, or maybe inappropriate ways that we start with this and go on, and how's that fall out from there?
Yeah, I mean, I love what you just said. It's so true that even the second book that I wrote, The Ballad in the Bible, one of the chapters is on Romans 13 and the Revolutionary War period, because I wanted to say to people who, especially white evangelical folks, have this kind of assumption that like you can just say Romans 13, obey the government. I don't even have to explain it. I don't have to tell you what verses in the chapter I'm talking about. I can say Romans 13, and that's an implicit theology of our relationship to government. Most of those people would feel pretty uncomfortable with the majority of the uses of Romans 13 during the Revolutionary War period, which is actually this country that you celebrate with fireworks and hot dogs on the 4th of July was in direct violation of Romans 13. Like that was not your team that had the ownership of that verse at that point. So sometimes our history discomforts us, and it flips around, like who kind of gets to own certain emphases biblically or certain verses. But I think to your question about the fallout, I mean, I look around at a lot of young evangelical folks in particular who are saying, I thought these were the Bible believing people. I thought that they said to take scripture really seriously. And it's become so blatantly obvious to me that they're cherry picking, that they're selective, that there's chunks of scripture that seem really important to me politically that they're just ignoring. And it's not just a failure to advocate politically well or to have a good political witness. It's making people feel like I can't trust you theologically. Like it seems so patently obvious that your politics is shaping the verses you go to, the emphases you think matter, the theology you have of politics, rather than the other way around. And I'm watching a lot of my peers kind of do the opposite thing, where they're just saying, okay, the Republican Party platform doesn't determine my biblical interpretation anymore, but maybe the Democratic Party platform does, or maybe progressive activists do. So it's like we haven't been given a good model for faithful reflection on scripture that shapes a lot of our political life. And so all we do is take that model we were already given and flip some of the particulars. And I think the most grievous thing about it is not just that people are saying, oh, my Sunday school teacher or my grandparents or my parents, I don't trust them anymore, and I disagree with their politics so deeply. I think the really grievous thing is people are missing that scripture does have such surprising resources for our political life. And we're basically saying, well, if the way they did it was wrong, maybe we just check the Bible out of all of this. Maybe it has nothing to say to our politics. When we're selective in our interpretation of history, right? I even just said like, oh, my Sunday school teacher, my grandparent, like they were wrong. That's such a narrow view of what the Christian faith is, to say we would have no models because we have in the last, couple generations in my white evangelical church, no models, doesn't mean there aren't models. We still are kind of narrowing our focus to those kinds of things. And even the students that I'll be teaching at Duke sometimes, I was doing an Old Testament class a few semesters ago, and some of them said such like sweeping statements about the Bible and politics. Like, you should never do this, get it out of there. It's so terrible. And I finally had to just be like, the idea you have in your head of the Bible and politics is the moral majority. And you're right. I disagree with things that they did. Widen that out though. Like if you're going to say you should never use the Old Testament in politics, do you want to say that to abolitionists? Do you want to say that to civil rights leaders? Do you want like, those are very different models to still question like, okay, what was faithful about this and what wasn't, but your focus is still so narrow. And that's what grieves me in a lot of churches is it's like, this thing I was given was not right. So that must mean there's nothing here in Christianity for me.
And so they're going to something else. Right? Altogether. Like some people are going to just a different opinion, maybe a different opinion. It sounds like what you just described is like they're leaving the scriptures altogether. Like, I'm not sure the scriptures can help us here. Politics is going to be something we have to deal with. Scripture compartmentalize it to some other part of my life, but not the
personal.
Not the political part of my life. But then where are we going? Like, so what we're seeing is church is, are we leaning now into like this hyper, are we seeing in this younger generation a lean into this hyper conservatism or this hyper liberalism? Is that kind of the fallout, or is it apathy? Is it, hey, I just don't know? Or kind of what are you seeing? What is the result of, I don't have a compass anymore. So what am I going to do about this space?
Yeah, I think the way you just described it is really good, because a lot of this, especially students, again, I'm thinking a lot of Duke students, it feels like the options available to them are either hyperactivism, and the bar is so high. It's like, I have to know about everything, and I have to be unwavering in my opinions about things, or I'm not sufficiently for the cause.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Miss anything, and you might get, you get
canceled by your own.
Right. You said one wrong word, you had one wrong opinion, and it is really a heavy burden to carry. But then there's the folks that just get exhausted by that. And then it feels like the other option is just like complete apathy. Because if the folks that are in the activism space won't take anything less than just like complete obsession with this, then it feels like the alternative is, I just don't care at all. And I was just at a conversation that was hosted by some Duke professors recently, and all the students were in tables talking about things. And there was a woman who said to me, like, I believe the people who tell me that for me to be politically involved means I have to care about all of this stuff and I have to do all the research, but I'm just exhausted and I don't even know where I could get any resources to address it. And this was it was an interfaith conversation. And I was just thinking, like, this is such a good example of what I said earlier, of like, all of scripture should be shaping our political theology. All of the instances I gave give us a good sense of like, what is government? How do we relate to it? But there's other resources we need for like, what is language? What are practices that sustain the work that we're doing? Because she's coming up against not just a failure of theology to help me shape like how I vote or how I think government is. She's going like, there's got to be something out there that helps me be able to do this in a healthier way, so that I'm not so burdened by all of it that I can't have a conversation, that I can't disagree with someone well, or that I can't even keep showing up for the things that I want to show up for. And historically, Christians have had that, like, not just in terms of practices and songs and spiritual disciplines, but also in terms of, I mean, listening to her talk, I was like, wow, if you really believed, like some of, I think, the most successful activists in our country's history believed, that Christ is returning to make all things new, and that does not lead to isolation or inaction from you, but it actually fuels faithful work because the weight of the world is not on your shoulders, that would change everything for you. But you feel like it's on the weight of the world is on your shoulders. So of course it feels like either I shoulder that weight and I kill myself trying, or I take it off and I'm apathetic. Yeah, I'm just done.
It seems like, you were talking earlier around what I heard in what you were saying is this moving into this duality of body and spirit, right? So the church has not been holistic in its thinking about that, or at least the evangelical church particularly has not been holistic in that. And so when they think about and they butt up against politics, they see it as something that deals with the body, right? And so it's not as high ranked as the things that deal with the soul. So they don't feel a compulsion to kind of engage justice work and social justice work, because that'll be figured out if you just get to know Jesus. This will all work itself out. And so what I'm hearing is, you've got this generation that's like, hey, these things are happening. It's affecting people who I know and their bodies, and the church has nothing to say about that. They just keep giving me these platitudes about the gospel and coming to church, and our stuff happens out there, and you're seeing children being separated at the border. You're seeing people killed on the street, and you come in on a Sunday and you're talking about love, the 5 love languages, you know what I mean, or something at church, and you're like, wait, there's something that's disconnected, right? So you have this separation almost in the church of body and soul. And so the next generation, like, okay, well, the soul thing I'm gonna put over here, and I'm gonna go full out now into the body, which I would articulate as I'm going full out now into this justice space, into this political space. But even that space, sans the soul, also has nothing fully for you, right? And so you've got to have this merger. And what I'm hearing in this idea of this burnout is, to your point, if you believe that Christ has got it, right? And I'll put that in the soul camp, right? The spiritual camp, that he's got it, and he is actively working. Like he's on a mission to make all things new. He's working. Then you don't in this area right here, you're just doing things that can aid in this, but it's still moving, right? If you don't show up to that protest, if you don't, put something on your socials that like Christ is still moving in that direction. Yes. And I think also, and I love that you're talking about this sort of kind of restoration, because I feel like in all the spaces I'm in right now, and I'm at Fuller right now, and there's a lot of ways in which they're trying to help people go, how do you rest? How do you restore? How do you understand your body? But we actually had somebody on our show a couple of months ago who was talking around, she'd written a book called Social Justice for the Sensitive Soul. And she was articulating different roles in the work of engaging in the justice space. Whereas we only think about it as the megaphone and the protest, but there's other roles. It's like, okay, you need a researcher. You need somebody who's doing marketing. You need somebody who's praying. You need somebody who's setting up tables for food and all these different roles. And I think what I hear is sometimes people go, I have to do all of that. I have to be good at all of that, as opposed to working where even the spiritual talks about unity of the body of Christ. That even in this work over here, take that and go, but what part do you play over here to engage that you're getting from the spiritual area, right? And so I can see a lot of that burnout, and I'm again, we don't help with that in the church because we still have this sort of duality of how we think about that. And I'm curious I don't know how to bring that back. You know what I mean? I don't know if you're seeing people helping with that with this next generation or not in there.
Yeah, I think some of the things that are most encouraging to me are the churches that are doing what you just said. Because there are churches, even in my own city, right? There are more progressive churches that will put up signs saying like, we're doing this justice work, or just kind of identity-based things. Like we're the kind of church that supports these people or welcomes people. And I think a lot of the students nearby are going like, well, I can join a club. Like I can get, at a group on campus that will fight for this. I don't actually need the church to do it. Yeah. Then there's churches in the area that are doing what you said of like, we worship Jesus. We don't really care about politics, partially because we don't really care about material bodies, but also because it feels contentious and it feels like outside of our realm, and just preach the gospel. But then there's churches, and they do tend to be smaller. I do think they tend to be the ones that like are not getting the press coverage, et cetera. But there are churches that say, not only do we put these things together, we preach the truth about who Jesus is and what his return looks like, and we show up to the Crisis Pregnancy Center, and we show up to there's a home near my church for adults with developmental disabilities and adults without developmental disabilities to live together. They show up for work towards racial justice in our community. There was a group that recently showed up to a city council meeting to make sure that the office that deals with housing disputes in our city had someone that spoke Spanish, because the majority of folks showing up to deal with those housing disputes speaks Spanish. So there's churches that are doing all those things, not just melding that with good theology, but melding it with, we're a community that has spiritual practices that help instill in our bodies and our souls these truths. And I love the point that this other person made about community and the different needs that a community has to work together. The other real gift I've seen some of these churches give is to say, hey, if you show up, we're providing venues for conversation about the greatest needs in our community. We're focusing in our community. We'll talk about national stuff, but we're focusing locally. Yeah. And when we do that, we also offer opportunities for someone to say like, hey, I'm a public school teacher. You don't have to be the expert on all of the policy about our public schools, but know me and ask me questions. Yeah. And hey, you're a lawyer and you deal with like public defense in our city. Tell us how to think about the judges that are up for election, or the sheriff, or I want to do my own research, but I also am a limited person and I can't know everything. You have expertise in this. Help me understand. So it's like, it's not just that the church provides an opportunity to say, we'll do this. We're doing this through the election at my church, regular opportunities to pray and spend time together in prayer. But it's not just that kind of grounding discipline. It's also, hey, we're having the conversation. So I learn about who has expertise in different areas and who can say, I'm not the person that's putting the protest together or getting this letter signed for our city council or organizing the people that will come to this meeting, but I can show up if someone in my community is doing it. So for me, it's like, I know a lot about paid family leave policy because I spent a few years working with some folks on that. If someone in my church wants to talk about that, I will give them all my thoughts. We can have a great conversation. That takes a little bit of the burden off them because they can care about something that I think really matters for Christians to care about, families, especially vulnerable women and children. But it's not like, here's the list of 50 things you have to care about, and to care about it, you have to do all of the research yourself. You have to show up to the things all yourself. You have to organize the things all yourself. There's both spiritual disciplines that help you balance it, but there's community that does too.
Mm-hmm. Now, you've mentioned a couple of times spiritual disciplines.
Yeah.
So what do you mean? Like, I don't know if anybody is thinking about engaging in this season right now around politics that they're thinking anything about spiritual disciplines. So what do you mean by that?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I joke sometimes at churches that everyone, when I show up, just says like, who should I vote for? And no one ever asks like, how should I pray? Or what spiritual disciplines should I adopt? Or I think this is a crucial feature of a distinctly Christian political witness, that we are people that, for the sake of not burning out, but also for the sake of our own spiritual health and genuine love of our neighbor, pay attention to what is necessary to put us in rhythms so that even when this election season is over, I have the emotional bandwidth and the resources and the time to continue serving my neighbors, because they will still be in need. There will still be political issues that need to be advocated for after this election is over. So while it's happening and things are very draining and social media is angry and you're consuming tons of political media, you need things like periods of silence and solitude. You need things like a regular rhythm of prayer. The 2016 election, I set an alarm on my phone 3 times a day to pray the Lord's Prayer. And it was amazing how much that affected my life in that season, because sometimes I would be facing some great political crisis in my community and thinking like, I don't know what can fix this. And my phone alarm would go off and I would pray, your kingdom come. And it would just give me a different sense of what mattered and what was important. Or I would be in a conversation with folks in my church and I would be like, how can you possibly think the things that you think? Like, I don't understand how we could come to such different conclusions. Sure. I'm tempted to think you're evil or stupid. That's I don't know how else to explain this other than you're evil or stupid. And my phone would go off and I would pray, our Father. And I would just think like, we share a father with each other. That's just a pause, a moment to realize who they are to me. So things like that, things like getting into a period of, into a pattern, of feasting and fasting from certain things, especially even from political media that might be most kind of malformative to your soul. And then feasting in political ways, saying like, okay, if I'm done scrolling, if I'm done doom scrolling, if I'm done consuming a bunch of cable news about things I have no agency to fix, maybe the feast that I then do is I actually, because I'm not doing any of that other stuff, I have time to show up to a city council meeting or to bring a casserole to my next door neighbor or to do something that positively impacts my community on the level I actually have agency. But thinking of that as a spiritual discipline, I think really matters, because to your point earlier, it synthesizes things. It says like, I need practices that make me a better participant politically and that serve my soul and make me a more faithful Christian. And those actually aren't two separate goals. Those often are very, deeply connected.
Yeah, I think the next generation, as we get, we move down the list, like this practical, actual, I think the expectation or the disappointment that the generation is feeling is that disconnect between some spiritual abstraction from their point of view might be, oh, Jesus, Christianity, there's some ideas there that seem to sound great, but the implementation of those ideas, I don't see that. And when pressed, when the implementation of those ideas, I may see some of them sometimes, but when challenged with discomfort or the loss of power or the loss of convenience, I notice that you put those down in the name of being practical toward your power and your convenience. And like, wait a minute, so it's strong enough only for a little while, not enough for the whole thing. And it leaves a generation asking the question, is it really worth it to really lock in on that? Is it really good? Does it really lead to something that's good? I have an idea that when you're going through your generations, I think generation, like you think like, for me, I look at the boomers. It's hard to do this with generational things because these are huge generations. And so this is an oversimplification, but I think boomers generally we're leaning into the soul space, and they're like, hey, what's going to happen when you die? So the big question generationally for the Christians and the boomers were, what's going to happen when you die, which is a gospel. How the reason Jesus died is what we focus in on. That's the main thing we're going to talk about. We'll talk about the other things, but we're going to bring it back to where are you going to be when you die today? Like, do you know where you're going to go? And then millennials come in. We can just skip Gen X because nobody talks about Gen X.
Why are you skipping Gen X?
Because we're the middle children of the generation conversation.
The fact that you said that you should skip Gen X proves that you're a middle child.
That's right. I'm a middle child.
Nobody
but
cared.
Millennials, their question became instead of what happens when you die is, will you love me anyway? And I think the kicker was anyway, right? And millennials brought up, I love that Jesus died that way, but I'm paying attention to the way Jesus lived. And I want to know about that. So now you have two generations talking about two different aspects of the gospel, missing each other. And most of our cultural conversations are the product of the anyway. Almost all the, like, can I be disqualified from your love? If I'm black, if I'm this and that. And I think millennials are driving that conversation. And then Gen Z, again, it moves from the soul, from the spiritual to the concrete, from the abstract to the concrete. And then you get to the Gen Z, and Gen Z is like, yeah, cool, I love all of that, but does this actually work for a good life? And I think Gen Z's question is, cool, but what actually works? What is the actual practical thing that works? And I think those are the three sort of main high level. Again, we're talking about huge generations, but I'll say the heartbeat of these generations are these three things. And as these generations talk to each other, they just miss each other because they're centering their question as the central question to existence of life. And so when you come to politics, boomers are like, the supernatural stuff has to take control. So we have to take power to win back for the spiritual battle of against the enemy. And millennials like, yeah, but we need to have a government that loves and respects everybody. And so I think Jesus would have done that. And then I think Gen Z is like, yeah, but I don't know what works. I've watched all the institutions fail. I've watched marriage fail, economy fail, college fail, the church fail, marriages fail. I watched everything fail. So I don't know that I can trust any of it. So I'm very open to the idea, but I need to understand what works. Everything has great ideas attached to it. Everything has great rhetoric attached to it, but I don't know that it has any real application I can put my hands on. And so Gen Z, I think, is looking for something that has real practical resonance and real practical pathway to a fulfilled sort of life and way to live. And I think the church has an opportunity to step into that, even with the political space. So I'm wondering if I don't know. What do you think about that? Does that track, or does it sound, as you're listening to Gen Z and millennial, does it sound like something that echoes in what you hear?
No, I really appreciate that, and I do think, even when I was describing kind of the spiritual disciplines and ways that the church could say, okay, there are practices and habits that help us do this healthier. A lot of Gen Z folks are looking for that. They're just not looking for it or finding it in the church. So you can find an Instagram guru that will give you some disciplines to do for your day, right? Or you can find someone who will say, here's the
and they're kind of open to they're totally open to it.
Yeah. And what I think the church could do in response is both say, like, we have those things, and it comes in the form of this community. And this community is not bound together like most of the communities you encounter online, which is shared resentment and hate. And if you have one difference of opinion, you're booted out. But actually, this is a community shaped by the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And you, to your point about, you can change nothing. Like, you are in, nothing you say, no wrong opinion, no wrong word is going to get you booted out of this. You belong to this. But also then to say, I think we're going to get to a place where we are, and I think Gen Z is here in a lot of ways. They want that stuff, and you can find that stuff online, but they're very suspicious of the commercialization of it all.
Right.
Like, that Instagram guru is going to ask you for a $5 a month subscription fee for that spiritual discipline.
Right.
And I think the church has an opportunity to say,
to ask for more money.
to pass the plate more often.
Yeah, I mean, like, you just gave me a whole new way to do this. This is fantastic.
Subscription service.
I think we have the opportunity actually to say, like, first of all, to show that we are serious about what we're doing by being very transparent about how we use money and using it in ways that are radically giving to those that are not within our institution. So I know multiple churches right now that are working on inching up bit by bit the percentage of their budget that goes to especially local ministries as a bigger and bigger chunk of what they're spending money on. And young people respond to that. I mean, I think they should. I think this is also just like a justice question and a faithfulness to God question. But also, that Instagram influencer is not putting, her budget up for a vote every year. Like, that Instagram influencer is not giving a ton of money to outside sources unless it's collaborations with brands, So the church has an opportunity to say, you assume that we are the ones misusing money, and we should lament that. We have been in many ways throughout our history done that, which is why we're going to work really hard to show you that we're using it well, and also that we'll care for you regardless. Like this is a purely transactional relationship with an Instagram influencer. It is not a purely transactional relationship with us, which is why I think it is actually politically relevant. The churches that continue to do we have a meal train when someone's in the hospital or has a baby. Like we have opportunities for people to like help with mowing their lawns or showing up and helping things and fixing things in their house. Like opportunities to say like, this is not an institution like other institutions that you know. It is an institution. There's a shape to it. There's certain kind of rules and it operates in certain ways, but it's not transactional in the way most of the institutions you interact with are.
We've been talking about generations and politics and leaving the church. Did you see that New York Times article that came out last week, in the last couple of days? Did you see that?
What's the title? Like,
so I don't know.
It was Sister Alice. She's like, I read and wrote several. So is it mine?
that one New York.
The one. They only do one.
I'm pulling it up. It was, it's going to be behind a paywall, but it was about how Gen Z men are the most religious generation, and Gen Z women are leaving. And so, like, one, what do we do with that as a? Because, like, I also went to Bible college. You're not at Washington Bible College. It's a whole joke here because it doesn't exist anymore. But it was in DC. We used to play you guys in volleyball. We would lose every year.
We don't believe any of this, just so you know.
That's right.
We have never seen. There's no papers on it.
I know. I don't even have my diploma because it got destroyed. It's a whole thing.
It's a whole thing. So you were the best option she had to support her stories. That you're like, oh, I know that college.
Sorry.
Nobody's done that, but her husband is the only one who can support her that it existed.
He also graduated.
Yes.
Kylie, it died. Can you fix it?
And that's questionable,
Okay, so back to my point.
All right, sorry
I don't actually know what it was anymore. Among Christians, young men are more religious than young women. So what do we do with that as the church? Because, Bible college. The majority of the women that I am still friends with, their faith has drastically changed in the last however it's been since we graduated. I am seeing that they are walking away. I've not walked away, but I have definitely, conservative Bible college. I have turned corners and gone under bridges and all the things. How do we help this generation of women find Jesus when their dad's Jesus is Trump?
You went right in.
Sorry, I don't know.
Okay. This is why we call her Pepper. She ain't worried about it. She's like, let me just go ahead and tell you how we do
it.
Sorry.
No, but
the next article headline is just written right here.
Daddy Trump. No, she's fine. Please continue.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's great. That's a great question. And I did read that article, and I do think part of what's going on there is, in the past, I mean, women have made up the majority of the church for basically all of Christian history.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the reason for that, there's a variety of reasons, but one of the reasons is in a world that gave women so little opportunity for meaningful work and agency and authority, the church provided that. Even though for a lot of the history of the church in lots of places, women were not in formal leadership roles, they were running the church. Like most of the churches I have ever worked in, it's like if the women were gone, just the logistics of the whole place would fall apart, even if there was someone standing and preaching 100%. Somewhere.
That's right.
So there was an ability for them to exert meaningful agency and authority, and to teach often, at least for women and children, and to assert authority in sometimes passive ways, which weren't always healthy, but was an opportunity for them in the church. So that's been true. Now we exist in a time where women have way more opportunities outside of the church, and in fact, often more opportunities outside of the church for meaningful work and leadership. And we're also increasingly seeing, I was just listening to Richard Reeves, who's done all this work on young men in America and the kind of decreasing both economic and educational outcomes for young men across racial difference in this country. And one of the things that he was saying was, we've always just sort of had a story of how needed men were. And we don't tell that story anymore. And so they don't have, there's a real deep connection between belonging and being needed. Yeah. And the whole time he was talking, I was thinking like, that explains so much of, and I'm a little bit skeptical of the New York Times article of like, how big is this change of the men being drawn to the church versus the women? But I think part of that that statistical change is this is an institution that says we need you, and you have an opportunity here to do meaningful work and to assert authority and to have a space where you belong, and other people are dependent upon you. And I think the best response then for the women who are going, I actually have less opportunities in the church. And also, to your point, it's an institution that's often not just patriarchal, but has supported politicians that have directly sexually assaulted women. That's like not something I want to be a part of.
Right.
Yeah. I think the other church, like I said before, it's probably going to be smaller churches. It's probably not going to be the big ones that make headlines in either direction politically. But I think a lot of smaller churches have an opportunity not only to say to women, we actually want to give you the same kinds of opportunities you're getting out in the world. There's not a distinction in this church between the ways that you can assert authority and find meaningful agency in your work and also in the church. But more than that, I don't think just the question is not just, where do I get to teach or where do I get authority? That's the question we're often asking about both men and women. And I think, to Richard Reeves' point, the real question is like, where am I needed and where do I belong? And I think the church can tell women, like, actually, some of you have a lot of gifts for leadership and teaching, and we want to give you platforms to use them. But also, you don't actually have to have just the same pressures men have had in the past of like climbing some ladder or being the strong one or being assertive or actually, the variety of gifts that you offer are real gifts here. We don't want to put men or women in boxes in terms of what they can do or what kinds of gifts they could bring. But we're going to offer opportunities for you to not just use gifts you have, but to belong to someone. To like, I think especially we're showing now women are having children later or less children or not at all. People are getting married later or not at all. Right. I think increasingly for both men and women, it's going to be the same thing, actually, to say in the church, you belong to a family and you are cared for and you care for others. And not just you get the meal train when you're in the hospital, but actually there's something deeply necessary and human about saying, we actually need you to teach this second grade Sunday school class. Actually, someone needs you to bring a casserole next Wednesday. Like, this will fall apart if you are not involved in it. That's not what the world often tells us. A burden, an undue restriction, something that makes me smaller or that restricts me. That's actually a way for me to be more fully human. And I think if people start to experience that in churches, I think that will be more attractive than we think. Kind of like how we often in the past have kind of smushed the supernatural stuff under the rug, and all of a sudden Gen Z is like, we're into the supernatural stuff. Tell me someone rose from the dead. I think the same thing's going to be true with this other stuff, where in the past we, seeker sensitive churches said like, we'll put no obligations on you. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to show up to anything. I think all of a sudden it's going to be, actually, we're going to put some obligations on you, and you're going to be surprised in that you like it and you actually want that.
And what I think is interesting about what you're saying too is the move. Well, here's what I'd say is the move for it to be different in the future. The church itself has to be, they have to be better focused in how they then utilize those who come to the church to be needed. So, and historically, at least in our generation, because we were in this church growth movement, then your efforts terminated on the church. Right. Yeah. In the sense of, yes, come and we need you to build this church. Right. So now all the people are coming in. Here's my gift sets. And it's sort of corralled in this country club of building the monster. Right. And that feels it feels hollow, right? It doesn't even feel family. It feels like organization.
Well, it feels like the Instagram guy.
Yeah, exactly. Like I'm giving money, but I feel like it's only coming here.
It's for them, and not for.
It's as I say, it's arrows in work. Yeah. But you've got these generations that are like, no, we're looking arrows out, and we're seeing what's happening in the community. So if the church is going to be helpful for this folks that are thinking arrows out, is that they need to, when they come in, that they are, if I can use that buzzword, they're discipling them in such a way as they're understanding of what it means to be a Christian is not just about being a part of a church or building a church, but it's being the church in the community. So yes, you come in and you'll hang out and do a second grade class, but part of what we're actually instilling in you is how to be a better citizen in your community. Yeah. We're instilling in you how to actually connect with your neighbors across the street who may be a little different from you. We're using this conversation around politics, and we're bringing it to the pulpit, and we're giving you a theology because the local politics needs you in those spaces making those decisions. And I know, over the last couple of years, there's been a kind of a market theology, if you will, like trying to help people go, yes, your job is actually a place where you work out what Christ is doing. Right? It's not that the ministry is the people who preach in the pulpit. Your you're doing ministry out there. And so I think as people come back, if the church just doesn't fall into that church growth movement, it becomes nimble. You've mentioned these small churches. I think that's a really core piece of how churches really invade communities, if you will. I remember going to Cuba several years ago, and there used to be this rule in Cuba, like if you got over 25 members of your church, you had to split. Like you weren't allowed to have more than 25 members. So you would see these churches, they'd get, 25, 30, and they'd split. And then the 15 of them would just go a couple blocks down. And they were in such community with that other church, then now they had community with this church, and then they'd birth, and you'd have 5 churches that had family community because they had birthed out of each other, but they were in proximity and they could collaborate together in the community, and they knew all the needs there, right? And they surrounded it, even though they didn't have the big building. They collaborated together in there. And I think that that's a piece that really grew. I mean, we saw the church in Cuba just explode. They thought they were trying to destroy the church, but it exploded, and the church got to do more. So I think that's a really important aspect of as people are coming back in. I'd love to kind of, as we're kind of wrapping up these pieces, like almost for the listeners, like just put a list together, right? Like we've talked about this idea of people walking away from the church. We've got this generation. We're talking about women walking away from the church. I think most people, when they're looking at the political landscape, they are hearing stories, at least, of people who are saying, I'm done with the church. They're getting on Instagram and they're seeing these evangelicals that used to be evangelical, and now they're saying all these things about the church, right? Like they hear us even sometimes frustrated with the church. So what does the church, and we can just rap about it a bit, just from listening, like what are the things that we would say, like, hey, here are a couple of things the church can do to welcome and entice, if I can use that word, folks back into community with each other in their communities. Does that make sense?
In their neighborhood, in their political
I'm saying, maybe I think about it. I like to use the word community from a church standpoint. Okay. So it's Christian community. Come back and be in Christian community. If that's the case, okay, so what do I need to be? Even I don't want to make it about checklists, but just some ideas that can help people think. What do I need to do that? What are some things I can do to get that? We talked a bit about several of them, but I just want to kind of throw them into a spot that people can go, oh, I remember that. Anything come to mind?
Well, if I was talking to, and I want to hear your thoughts, Kaitlyn, but if I was talking to a pastor, like one of the things we're thinking about at the church I'm at is trying to change our orientation from, we're starting to say we're going to measure impact instead of effort, as a concept, right? Because to the point that was made earlier, people don't know the impact that churches actually do have. And the next generation is kind of asking the question, what good does the church actually make?
Yeah.
Right? And I would make the case that our tax exemption, that conversation is going to come. And because the government doesn't quite care about theology, we have our tax exemption because we are supposed to make some sort of social impact that the government is saying, we don't want to pay for that. So we'll incentivize you to be this positive force for social good. Can you show us receipts of that social good? And if you can't, then there's money that we could use to create that. Yeah. So I think measuring impact over effort, and the picture I always say is like, for those of us who are parents, we've all had our kids clean the bathroom, but not really clean the bathroom. Like, they're cleaning the bathroom. You walk in, you see the streaks.
You're like,
you see the streaks. You say, I see you move some dirt around, but I don't think you've actually cleaned it.
Turn the water
and
on.
So you walk in and you say, I thought you cleaned I thought I told you to clean the bathroom. And they say, I did. And when they say I did, what they're saying is, I spent effort doing something.
Uh-huh.
I spent this time. I spent a whole hour in the bathroom doing something.
Yeah.
And to them, that effort is, I did to clean the bathroom.
And they should get a ribbon for that, don't you think?
To us, well,
participated.
It's better than not doing anything. But to us as a parent, we're like, but the bathroom is still not clean. Right? And so whether you spend 15 minutes or 50 minutes, the parents coming in and saying, did the impact match? And they're measuring the effort. And I think we do a lot of effort measurement in church. And I think part of the generational vibe is like, I see that you're like doing stuff. I just don't know that it's actually making the difference. And so I think numbers, what we've said is, it would be great to have statistics that show that 20 churches for every 5 churches that joins a zip code, I'm just making things up.
I know.
Decreases the murder rate or the pregnant or the crisis pregnancy rate or the crime rate, right? And so the idea is that, I think about when Jesus walked into a set, they were excited before they even knew what he had to say because he represent goodness to their community in healing.
Okay.
So anyway, so I think
impact reports.
So I think impact over effort.
Okay, cool. What do you think, Kaitlyn? A couple of things.
2 things come to mind for me. One, what you were just saying was so helpful of my pastor not that long ago, knowing that I was traveling a ton during the election season and I was like missing some things and I was sad I wasn't there all the time, said to me, we are sending you out. And just that kind of blessing of people in the work that they're doing, I think is really important to say, not only do we think that the work you do quote unquote outside of the church is really valuable, but we also don't think it's valuable separately from us. Like, we are connected to this. You are accountable to us also for the work that you do. And we want to resource you and support you, even on this just spiritual level of, I think a blessing actually does something, right? Like, I'm asking for God to sustain you and to bless the labor that you are doing. And even in that blessing, reminding people, you're doing the best that you can, but you are not God. Like, if God does not bless this work, it will not flourish. It is not up to you.
Yeah.
But the other thing, I think, in terms of both building communities that are healthier and attractive to people, but that also produce the kind of faithfulness to their communities we've been talking about, is an emphasis on intergenerational relationships and opportunities for conversations to happen intergenerationally. So my church, we've gone through periods of time where we do Wednesday night supper in small groups. Everyone eats together and we break up into small groups that were, designed to be intergenerational. And both the experience of like eating food really matters. Sociologists, theologians, tons of people will tell you it is a vulnerable, meaningful human act that makes more possible conversations that you would have thought were not possible. But we ate together with intergenerational groups and with families, like kids are running around and also someone can't get up the stairs because they're elderly and someone, you have to make sure that they can get there. There's just like the actual physical needs of this community become quite apparent to you when there's food involved and there's, conversations around tables. And then providing opportunities, like I said before, for those conversations to not feel like they must be bound to this very small personal spiritual box. Like broaching conversations where things that are happening politically in our community can come up in a way that isn't sometimes churches will do this. They'll ask me to help facilitate this. It'll be like, Tuesday night, we're talking about politics. Everyone come and we'll all hash it out. And it's like, everyone comes so ready to fight.
Yeah,
and
no
so,
doubt.
Confident that I already know what you think. And I know where the battle lines in this church are drawn and you're over there and I'm over here. And instead it's like, we've been doing supper in small groups for 6 weeks. And at some point, because this is how the Bible works and because the Spirit is working in this community, the text we read says something to some local community issue and people in our community who are experts in it can speak to it. And we're suddenly having a conversation about it that might still be really challenging because we have differences of opinion, but it's already happening in a lower temperature environment than let's talk about the ballot measure on Tuesday night. Everyone come and hash it out. But it also practices us into being a kind of people that recognize that our faith means something personal and spiritual and means something public and political. And it doesn't just mean something public and political for me individually. This is still a communal thing. So I need my community to help me do this well.
That's good. That's good. Pepper, you look like you were wrestling.
Yeah, I think for me in this conversation, that was really individualist.
What do you need?
I wonder if churches were focused more cross-culturally, if that would help bridge the gap with some people leaving. Like, I know for me and myself, I think the conversations that we have, not in this room, but, figuratively in this room, have kept me from completely walking away. God bless my husband, who's a pastor. But like, to be able to listen to stories that aren't mine, to be able to hear from people that don't have the same view on Romans 13 that I had growing up, right? Like, apart from these people and this conversation and the people that I engage with cross-culturally, I would have pieced out because my version of that I grew up with white Jesus just wasn't cutting it anymore. And learning how different cultures engage with the gospel and engage with God and has transformed my faith going forward.
I love that. I love the whole convo. I've been kind of keeping a little running list over here. I was just thinking like what would be some of the stuff. So I think if I'm if I'm thinking about what the next generation needs from the church, right, kind of summary of our conversation, there's a theology that's needed, right, an actual theology around politics and what that looks like, cross-cultural interaction because it gives different perspectives that they can learn from and gifts that they bring, an understanding of what it looks like to engage the community, local activation, not just thinking about the big American aspect, discipleship of gifting, helping them know how to use their gifts, not only in the church, but out in the community. A resurgence of spiritual practices, impact reports, right, instead of the effort aspect, radical local giving. Let's see, but be transparent about what the money's going to do it locally. And then sending them out into their spaces with their gifts as a blessing that they are a part of what the church is as they go out. And this works best as it's done in intergenerational engagement. And all of this is done and guided under this oneness in Christ, right? Mm-hmm. I think that's a really helpful list. Was anything missing from there that I missed in there? Did I hit the 90 seconds, Chino? I know she's like, oh, I'm going to post that. I need to engage that. I have no idea. Yeah, no, but I think what I've loved about this is I think all generations would respond to this list. So we say it's like, hey, this gets the young people back, the next generation, but I think every generation would really enjoy being at a church that's engaging in these things because it hits on all the, you were talking about like maybe even the heart language of these generations. I think this list hits something there, and that creates a space for the church to be the church, which is an intergenerational, intercultural expression of the image of God in the world. And I think if we give this, not just for the people who left, but the people who are outside wanting something and looking around and going, where do I find this thing that we're also just kind of stirring and all this tension? Right. Where do I find this?
The nomadic Christians.
The nomadic Christian and just the nomadic people. Yeah. Just people who are like, everything I'm doing is not fulfilling what this emptiness is. And and what happens now is they go to the church and it's almost worse than where they were outside in the community. So they're like, we talk about the race space. It's like, oh man, I wish I could build relationships cross culture. I'm having a hard time. You know what I'll do? I see this Revelation 7:9 passage where all tribes, tongues, and nations are a part of this church. I'm going to just go to a church and then I'll be able to like get in there with all these different cultures and people. And they go to a local church and like, oh my gosh, like this is worse. I can get better diversity at my school or at the grocery store. Yeah. You know what I mean? And this is the place that's supposed to be doing it. So the church, honestly, just living into all the pieces that we already have had, and I think we have had over time, keeping that in front of us, I think it creates a space that makes the people of God want to be there, but I also think it woos those who are outside of the church into the area, right? So, man, I love this. Kaitlyn, thank you for giving us some time today. Yeah. I know you've got lots of things you're engaging in and working on, and so we love that you came in and had this conversation with us. It's so helpful. How can the audience connect with you and stay connected to you as you go forward?
Yeah. If you're a podcast listener, you can listen to The Holy Post or to the show that I make with The Holy Post called Curiously Kaitlyn, where I take questions that little kids have about theology or the Bible and find scholars to answer them. I don't know how much longer I'll be on Twitter or Instagram, but for now.
Are you talking at all or like for this season? Like for the next 3 weeks? I
don't know.
Like, the end is near.
I just put it out there. If you don't see me in 3 weeks, I tried to tell you. Yeah. Okay. All right. So we won't no handles for you there. Just like if you really want to find her, like just find her because it may not be there in a few weeks.
Yeah.
I can understand that. There's some frustration in that too, for sure. Well, we bless you as you go forward. Hey, look at that. We just did a little blessing, for the young people. Bless you as you go forward. You're part of the community. You're a part of the family of Colored Commentary and Threaded, which powers this. And so we're thankful. Thanks for coming in. Thankful for everybody who's in here. Always thankful. Having Pepper in here, giving a little bit of engagement. Some good questions. I mean, you dropped something.
Sorry.
I love it. It's fantastic. No, do not apologize for that. It's
That's right. It's totally okay.
Just put some pepper on it, right? We're just going to have all the peppers at the bottom of the screen. Schmevin will just be putting the peppers down. Then like it's going to be smoking. It's going to be good. Fantastic. I know nobody saw Chino. She's over here just taking notes. Chino, good to have you in here. It's good. Michael in the booth here today. We miss Schmevin. We miss Schmevin as he's editing this. Antwuan, always good to have you, my friend. Yeah. Good stuff. Right in the midst of a conversation I know you and I have constantly. And so it's helpful to have that convo. And obviously, thank you, listeners, those who are listening and those who are viewing, for coming in for these conversations. It's always really helpful. When we talk about colored commentary, the colored piece is really about looking through these different lenses. And so we've been able to do that in the midst of this conversation around Christianity in the public square. And so we thank you for hanging in with us on that. It's exciting stuff. We hope this has been a blessing, and we hope that this helps you as you go out into your world. Stay colored.